Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast, where HR, benefits, and total rewards leaders explore the future of workplace well-being. I'm your host, Sokoler, founder and CEO of Journey, the leading proactive mental health solution for modern companies. In each episode, we bring you expert insights, real-world strategies, and candid conversations on creating healthier, more productive workplaces. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast. Today we have a very special guest, my dear friend, Dr. Sue Zbikowski, whose last name I always get wrong. So I'm excited for you to say it, Sue. One of these days I'll get it right. Chief Clinical Officer at Journey. How are you today, Sue?
I'm doing great, Stephen. Thanks for having me today. And you actually did fine with the pronunciation. So close enough. I'm not going to correct you here.
Thank you. As somebody whose last name is pretty much always said incorrectly, I try really hard to get it right, but I know that I still fail. So let me give our listeners a little bit of background. So Dr. Sue brings more than 2 decades of experience as a healthcare executive, behavioral scientist, and clinical strategist, blending rigorous research, real-world outcomes, and deep expertise in human behavior to make mental health support more meaningful and effective. Dr. Sue's worked across healthcare, digital health innovation, and workplace well-being, helping organizations design and evaluate programs that truly meet people where they are. I'm excited for this conversation. So let's start right at the beginning. Dr. Sue, tell us, how did you get into the line of work that you are in now?
Yeah. So, Stephen, it's been a little bit of a journey. Originally, I thought I was going to go into medicine. When I was about 10, my dad died of a heart attack. And so that really kind of had a profound impact on me. And kind of from that point on, I was very interested in the whole mind-body connection. I didn't really have the words for it then, but, I found myself reading a lot and kind of self-help, doing progressive relaxation, reflecting on how my family was handling the loss of my dad, which I will say they didn't handle it. We didn't talk about it. It was a very private thing. But as I went on this trajectory to kind of explore medicine, I found myself doing a practica and scratching my head one day, because what happened was I'm watching these patients come in and out of practice every single day, the same ones. And I thought, well, this is unusual. Why are we not curing people? And I thought we could do better. And that's when I got really passionate about research and prevention and realizing that we needed to focus on upstream treatment and giving tools to practitioners that would allow them to actually prevent the exacerbation of disease.
I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you. And I appreciate you sharing that. And it's wonderful that you were able to turn that traumatic incident into, a career that's helped so many people. So thank you for that. When you think about the hardest moments people face mentally, obviously that being, right at the top of the list, what's often missing when they finally do reach out for help?
Yeah, I think, one of the struggles still is that there is a lack of true compassion and understanding as it pertains to mental health. And I think it's often due to the fact that we don't physically see mental health. When you think about diseases or illness, you might see that, right? It's more tangible. But when it's something that's a little bit more internal, it's hard for people to empathize with. And so when people are talking about how they're feeling, it can make them feel uncomfortable, or they may not feel the same connection to it. And so that makes it difficult to receive really a supportive message when you're talking to someone about how you're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do people most misunderstand about how mental health struggles actually show up day to day?
Yeah. And so kind of building on this, Stephen, the idea is, with it being hard to relate to, sometimes people have these stereotypes for what they think mental health is going to look like, that it is a crisis, a trauma, something, dramatic, an episode. But in fact, it can often be much more quiet than that. It is a progression or a shift where there's kind of a change in day-to-day functioning where individuals may feel less energy, less joy, less able to kind of show up the way they used to. And so those subtle hints can be missed because people are looking for something very different.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the clinical side of it. So maybe you can share a little bit of your background. Before joining Journey, you were the chief behavioral scientist at Humana and have done a whole host of other things. So let's talk a little bit about that. So from a clinical perspective, why do so many people wait until they're in distress before asking for help?
Yeah, and I think it goes to this kind of portrayal or this understanding that people may have about mental health that, they imagine that, mental health is about like laying on a couch, talking to a shrink, or that, when you think about mental illness, that it's some kind of, unstable or dangerous situation. And so, because of those portrayals or understanding, there's still this huge stigma around seeking help around mental health. There's this attitude that mental health should be something that's private, something that you don't talk about. As I mentioned in my opening remarks about my own family history, where, even through the loss of a parent, we didn't talk about it. It was meant to be private. And so people, still carry that with them. And as a result, that can result in people delaying getting help because of that stigma and sense that they should carry it alone.
And how often did you see people saying things like, I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until someone asked me, or the like?
Yeah, it's quite common. And, part of it is that, we're not always in tune with what's going on. And as I said, it's usually not going to be something dramatic or immediate crisis. There are situations like that. But for many people struggling with mental health, it's this slow progression of feeling a little different, feeling a little off, not feeling like yourself. And it's not until when people may be talking to someone else that suddenly, someone in your life might say, you don't seem like yourself. You don't seem as joyful. I don't see you laugh as much. I don't see you spending as much time, with us anymore. And so it's those kind of outward look of someone turning a mirror toward you and saying, this is what I see, that can suddenly help put things into perspective and realize that there's been a shift.
Yeah. One of the things that I see a lot of people doing, especially young people, but really people of all ages, is turning to AI, turning to things like ChatGPT to have conversations. And so I'm curious your thoughts on the benefits of that, but also the risks of self-identification or trying to address these things through the modern, LLMs.
Yeah. Well, I think the devil's going to be in the details on that one a little bit, Stephen. It's so early, but I think one, you're hitting upon a key thing, which is people are always looking for information to try to understand and normalize what they're going through, whether that was the internet before or an AI or chatbot now. We're still very curious about, am what I'm feeling normal, right? Is this normal? Should I be concerned? I think when it becomes problematic is when you're seeking help from online, right? Whether that be self-diagnosis, self-treatment, or expecting somehow that, a chatbot is going to suddenly, tell you this is the treatment path that you should follow. So you have to be careful about that. But I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic about the development of that technology in the appropriate setting, delivered by the appropriate companies with good guardrails. But I would not advise people to use ChatGPT or Claude or anything like that to diagnose or treat oneself.
Funny when I think about recording these and I think about how these will age. And I think, 6 months or certainly 6 years, but maybe even 6 to 12 months from now, people will look back and be like, oh my God, the AIs are doing so much, scratch what I said about this or that. So we'll have to timestamp this, that we're having this conversation in late January of 2026 and things are evolving quickly. Let's talk a little bit about the timing problem in mental health care. So in your experience, how important is timing when it comes to mental health intervention?
Yeah, timing really does matter. But one thing I want to say before, really diving into that is, clearly earlier is always better for any health, situation, whether it's physical health, mental health, early is better. But what I also want to make sure is, given all the stigma and shame around seeking help, that we do not want to continue to perpetuate the message that you should have gotten help sooner, or you're somehow at fault if you waited or wait, because everybody is going to seek help when they're ready or when they're open to it. So I don't want to be punitive about that. I want to make sure that people do not feel any sense of guilt or shame. But with that said, earlier is better, because when individuals are kind of just starting to, potentially have a concern or feel off, you're in a different place for receiving care, right? So perhaps the situation that you're going through hasn't made it to a full-blown crisis. You're going to have more bandwidth. You're going to feel differently and the care path options are different. So earlier is always better, but any time is better than no time.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. Bringing in that human component of it about the timing being right is very important. And so what's different clinically when support happens early versus waiting until there's a crisis?
Yeah. So, as I kind of just mentioned, the key thing is that hopefully one's mental health concern hasn't made it to the point where it's deeply entrenched or a full-blown crisis or something, totally unmanageable. And so the idea is that when you intervene earlier, people are hopefully in a better mind state where they have more mental bandwidth. Maybe they don't have the same emotional fatigue of having suffered for so long with something, that they have more energy to handle what's going on. So that gives them more time to reflect, to make different choices, to maybe even have different tools that are going to be available to dealing with that situation, rather than, when it's a full-blown crisis and it's focused more so than on just stabilizing someone and getting them through a crisis. And so it really shifts things up in the cycle.
Yeah. And are there warning signs that often go unnoticed in traditional care models?
Yeah. So I mentioned some of these earlier, Stephen, where it's this kind of subtle cumulative shift where, it's not that people suddenly change overnight by and large, right? There might be instances when that might happen. But, thinking about the normal trajectory is there's a, cumulative effect of things going on where slowly, again, someone may feel more irritable over time, may notice that they're more withdrawn. They may show up at work, right? Feeling like I'm still present, but maybe not as present as I really feel, right? And so it's these subtle changes where even employers can, miss these warning signs because they think, oh, my employee's present, they're doing their job, they're getting their work done, but they don't realize that they're doing it with less joy, less engagement, maybe not contributing as much. And so those are some of those things that we miss because those are warning signs.
Thanks for listening to the first half of the episode. I hope you're walking away with some valuable insights. I want to take a quick pause to tell you about my book, The Mental Health Advantage. If you found this conversation useful, you'll find 300 more pages packed with strategies, insights, and real-world applications. Grab your copy on Amazon. Just check the show notes for the link. And if you're looking for a more comprehensive mental health solution for your company, let's chat. You'll find another link in the show notes to reach out and explore how Journey can help you. Now back to the show. And companies nowadays, it's pretty standard to offer mental health support, which is a great evolution from maybe 20 years ago when it wasn't so common. And so that's really positive. But from a clinician's perspective, what's often missing in what you see when it comes to workplace mental health?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that you called it mental health support, because I think it's a question of, would you really say what's always offered is support? And I think the way in which I would frame most benefits is that it's really that employees may have a mental health benefit. First, it might be offered through their insurance, where it's covering sessions. And so it's mental health coverage is what's happening first. And then on top of that, there still continues to be more of like an approach of a traditional EAP. And so it's care that is covering people in crisis as opposed to actually providing supportive mental health care. And so I want to make that distinction that, while there might be some offering quote unquote support, by and large, we still see a model of insurance coverage and crisis care.
And what concerns you about those models, assuming that employees will raise their hand when they're ready?
Yeah, well, that just assumes that one, people are able to detect that something's going on and that they get care early enough. And so, when people get to that point, it's usually because they're overwhelmed, they're in crisis. And I think, again, there's a bit of I'm just going to say a little bit of an absurdity to expect that someone should have to self-diagnose. I have a mental health concern. I'm going to go I'm going to go seek treatment. If we think about this in a medical model, that would be like asking a patient to say to their doctor, well, I need coronary bypass because I have a blockage. Please do the surgery. But for some reason in mental health, we expect people to be self-diagnosing, asking for care, setting up sessions, seeking help, rather than getting some kind of proactive support to get individuals the treatment that they need early.
Yeah. And how do you think trust or lack of it affects whether employees actually use the support that their employers are offering?
Yeah, well, trust is a big issue. And, it's constantly something that we've been discussing over the decades. I'm amazed we still have to talk about trust, but there is this lack of trust between employees and employer, and especially in the mental health space. There's a history of employers not wanting to touch mental health topics with the 10-foot pole, like keep a distance. We offer this EAP, but I don't want to know anything about it. And it's because they need to create a little bit of distance and safety, but also in doing that, it creates, I think, greater skepticism around this model, right? Rather than embracing it and making it a culture where it's okay to get care. And again, you're going to have privacy and safety. In doing that, it leaves this ongoing skepticism. And so what's going to be really important is that employees feel like they trust their employer. They trust that they can use a benefit and support tool, that they are not going to be penalized for using that in no way that will affect their career path or their stability in a company. And so these are all those thoughts going through an employee's mind of, if I disclose or if I use something and speak out about this, will that somehow affect my employment in this company? So trust is very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about proactive care. Good prevention actually look like when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, this is where it really gets exciting to think about this, right? And what it is. And so, good prevention feels supportive. It's not about really diagnosing someone. Instead, it's about creating a program and a solution where it focuses on building awareness of how someone is doing, allowing people to self-reflect on, how stress is showing up for them, how their mood is changing, when there's shifts in energy. And so it's becoming part of everyday practice by being prevention focused and this self-reflection and being in tune, again, rather than focusing in on, addressing a crisis in the moment and a sense of urgency.
Yeah. And how do small, consistent check-ins change outcomes over time? One of the things I always talk about is consistency over intensity, but I'm curious from a clinical perspective,
I think of it as well. Yes, consistency is important. And then I also think about self-awareness is so important to well-being. If you're not truly in tune, it's very difficult to, work on one's overall well-being, right? And so the idea of a consistent check-in, whether it's throughout each day or throughout a day, is important because it gives you that space to reflect, to think, and to also even look at, how things could be different. And so that small check-in and taking time and space for that self-reflection is so important.
Yeah. And what happens when mental health support feels part of your daily life instead of sort of a last resort?
Yeah. I really think this is like the game changer, right? This is what becomes magical to get to that point where we really recognize kind of we're a whole being, right? So we have our physical well-being, our mental well-being. We're just a whole person. And so when mental health support is part of one's daily life, where it's acknowledging that and recognizing those two dimensions. Another analogy, just kind of like for people who like to be concrete and maybe, again, can't get their head around all of the mental health concerns as much, think about oral health care in our life. Every single day, we go through a routine of brushing our teeth a certain number of times per day, right? We've accepted we have to do it so many times a day. You floss so many times per day or week. And then, other kinds of oral health care. And it's all about taking care of your teeth. We just do that, right? It's just a natural routine. We don't even think about it. It's on autopilot. And if you could imagine mental health being the same exact way, where we're just going through these best practices of taking care of our emotional and mental well-being every day, and it's just routine to prevent us from having to go get a root canal or to prevent us from going to have to deal with some kind of medical or mental crisis, that's what it should look like. And so it's about normalizing it, making it part of everyday routine where it doesn't feel out of the ordinary or somehow that you're doing something different from everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you and I have known each other a long time. We met back when you were the chief behavioral scientist at Humana. And you have had a whole life of wonderful experiences since then. What chose you to bring your clinical leadership to Journey, and what about the model resonated with you?
Yeah, well, I love Journey on so many levels. And, even from my days at Humana and the work we were doing there, I knew what you were doing was special and unique. And so, what resonated for me, most is really how, what Journey does kind of aligns with what I believe, mental health care should be. And again, it's this idea of focusing on prevention, on being proactive rather than reactive, and focusing on people only in terms of a crisis. But, Journey is also, kind of amazing in that it has the whole continuum. And so, recognizing that there is this full journey and an arc for people's life and situation. And so there are times when you need, clinical intervention, but then let's try to work on helping people be their best, make mental health as part of their daily living, and normalizing that. So,
yeah, I feel very grateful that we've had the opportunity to work together for as long as we have. And I'm excited for what's to come, because you've helped to shape our proactive approach. And so just to double click on that, how does a proactive approach change the clinical experience for the individual?
Yeah, I think the key thing is that a proactive approach is really an empowering approach. It is where you are empowering people to take control and be supportive. And so it's very different than, again, self-diagnosis, showing up for, saying, I need help. Instead, you're giving people the tools and resources to be able to understand themselves better, to know what tools they have to manage how they're feeling and how to show up at their best every day. And so that's really the big shift here, is giving people those resources that they need to be empowered to use them every single day for their overall emotional well-being.
Yeah. And what excites you most about the direction mental health care could go in workplaces in the future?
Yeah, I think what excites me most is maybe one day we won't have to talk about it this way. Like that would be like the dream. But I'm also just very excited that, employers are embracing this approach. They recognize that we need to do more for our employees' well-being. They understand how well-being connects back to performance. But I think there is a growing compassion happening at workplaces. And that's what really touches me, to think that we can care about our employees, not just because they, are a tool in the toolbox, but instead they're humans and we have to care for them.
Yeah, I love that. So for leaders listening, what's one thing they could do differently tomorrow to better support the mental health of their team members?
Yeah, so tomorrow and every day. So it's like, don't just do it once. It's important tomorrow and every single day. Just make support visible and normal. That's really, really important. And so even if you think you have the best benefits in the world, be aware that by and large, employees still have no clue about what resources are always available to them, whether it's, their physical benefits for, their health insurance or for their behavioral health. So that's one thing. And then to really signal kind of that it's a psychologically safe environment. So promoting that culture of care and compassion, and really, listening. The best thing you can do is to check in with people every day and ask how people are doing and listen and genuinely care. And when you do that, that connection helps people to realize you care about them and it's genuine. So there are, small steps that a leader can do of showing that support.
And last question, what gives you hope right now about the future of mental health care?
Well, I think, again, there's a shift in movement. And I think Journey is doing this leadership in this space to really elevate everyone's thinking about how mental health care should be viewed. And again, that mental health care should not be seen as something on the side. It's something that embodies us, right? We have mental health. We should focus on mental health. And so that gives me a lot of hope for the future, that one day, again, we won't be having these conversations. Just like you said, we're going to think about AI differently, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Sue, I think this is a great place to leave it. Like I said, very grateful for you, for the work that you're doing at Journey, for everything you're putting into the world, for just being who you are. Thank you very much. And for those of you listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Sue. Check her out on LinkedIn. Anywhere else that they can find you? TikTok, Instagram, whatever new cool thing is out there that I don't know about?
Probably not, Stephen. Right now, I'm focused mainly on LinkedIn, but Instagram coming shortly. So
wonderful. All right. Thank you, Dr. Sue, and everybody out there. Be safe and have a wonderful day. Thanks for spending this time with us. We know you're busy. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Mental Health Advantage and leave a review. Thanks so much and have a beautiful day.